from the EWTN radio and television studios, this is EWTN Theology Roundtable, a conversation with the experts of EWTN's Department of Theology. Got questions about the liturgy, scripture, or tradition? They have the answers. Now, EWTN Theology Roundtable.
Well, welcome everyone to this month's EWTN Theology Roundtable. We're here to discuss a new topic today, a week earlier than normal because of some in-house scheduling. But we are airing live today on radio, and we will air here later in the month, beginning on Sunday, June 16th at 10 p.m. on television. I'm here with two staff members from our theology department, Cindy Cuellar and Noah Lett, to discuss the Land of Lakes statement, or Catholic education in the Land of Lakes statement, as we mentioned in our previews of the program. The Land of Lakes statement being a statement regarding the direction and the idea of a Catholic university in the United States, and in guidance, I'm sure, hoped for other countries as well. Yeah. And we've had a rather, it's been 50 years. They had the celebration of it here this past July. And what we want to take up today is what exactly was the Land of Lakes statement, which some are celebrating in the church this year, from 1967 to 2017. How does it fit within our understanding of the Catholic faith and Catholic praxis in the church? And has it been all good, or has it been all bad, or what has been the general effect? Because I think many people who are aware of it will certainly have an opinion of the Land of Lakes statement. We will be taking calls after this short introduction, so I want to give you that information here right off the bat. You can call us and get your question in the queue by calling 1-800-585-9396. That's 800-585-9396 if you're in North America. Or if you're outside North America, you can call in at 205-271-2958, 205-271-2958. And our international callers will get the courtesy of head-of-the-line privileges. So you can do that if you're in Britain, or if you're in the Philippines, or somewhere else. You can also send in questions on EWTN's radio Facebook page, or through EWTN's YouTube channel. So that's another way to get questions to us here in the studio. And finally, if all you've got in your hand is your cell phone, you can send us a text at EWTN 55000. Wait for a response from us, of course, and then put in your first name and your question. And that question will go to our radio department and be brought to our attention for the sake of being answered on the air. So you can do that. So, Land of Lakes. Well, as I noted, many are celebrating it this year. It's been 50 years since July of 1967, when a group of educators from Catholic colleges and universities in the United States met in Land of Lakes, Wisconsin, to craft a statement which was going to be a contribution to an international symposium, or an international university of Catholic universities and colleges around the world. And so in this statement from July 1967, they gave some idea of what the future of Catholic education should be in the United States, as well as some criticism of some of the limitations of Catholic education as they saw it at the time. And I think what we want to look today is to see whether that statement is faithful to what the Church has taught about the nature of not just Catholic education, but education in general. And Catholic theology and philosophy do have a good deal to say on that subject, as does philosophy generally going back historically. But we also want to consider some of the markers of failure, which I think we can see out there. The sense that many parents have that it's simply not safe for the faith to send your kids to Catholic colleges and universities. Not all of them, of course, but certainly it seems to be a general thing. So much so that the Newman Society was founded specifically to provide information to parents as to where there was fidelity to the Catholic idea of a college and university in the United States, and to promote those institutions that are making an effort to both be good educational institutions but also good Catholic institutions. So I think we then also have to ask the question, looking at the broader secular world of education in general, has the model of academic freedom being promoted at Land O'Lakes been realized today? Or is there really good counter arguments that particular approach, not the idea of being a free investigation and free research in the sciences or social sciences, but certain ideas of freedom that are out there, whether it's really being realized today on even the secular campuses. So those are all good questions. But first, Noah, give us an idea of what Land O'Lakes was actually about and what it said.
This is a document, as you pointed out, that was written up in 1967 by 27 men who were at in Minnesota, I think is where that is.
Wisconsin.
I live in Indiana. I don't live in either of those two states. So they drafted this document, which was in preparation for a larger conference. And it tells you in there that this is the view of the people that were at the conference and not their institutions and other places. However, it went on to have an influence across lots of institutions.
And be widely accepted by other colleges and universities.
It has 10 sections in it, and one of the things you should know about it is that they're proposing to reinvent the Catholic university. They're trying to make it modern as well as traditional, they say. And in there, they want to tell you what things they want to keep and what things they think that are to be changed. And they say, for example, in the first section, the second paragraph, it says a Catholic institution must be a place in which Catholicism is perceptibly present and effectively operative. They point out in the 10th section, third paragraph, but specifically, Catholic university should be Catholic in a profound and creative ways for the service of society and the people of God. And word creative should bring your mind up, because that's not a word they used in the Middle Ages, or afterwards they use that in the modern times to tell you change is coming. So what are the things that they wanted to keep? They say very clearly, for those that are listening and have the document, second section, first paragraph, it says that in Catholic universities, this operative presence is effectively achieved, first of all, and distinctively by the presence of a group of scholars in all branches of theology, because theology is not only a legitimate intellectual discipline, but also one is essential to the integrity of a Catholic university. Well, they're right about that.
Yeah, we can't argue with that statement, really.
Yeah. See, and they think this is a statement that, look at your school, Indiana University. I'm from Indiana. They don't have a theology department. So this is clearly something you would find, but at Notre Dame, which is Indiana, they do. Okay.
Right.
But there are things that they thought that are to be changed. They must replace clerical authority with the authority of the academic community. And that's found in the first section, first paragraph. It says, the Catholic university must have a true autonomy and academic freedom in the face of authority of whatever kind, lay or clerical, that's external to the academic community itself. So they will become their own supervisors, their own authority.
I didn't realize, Noah, that Catholic education was so constrained and clamped down that no good fruits were coming from it until this day. But it sort of sounds like that, the way they describe it.
Makes it sound dire, doesn't it?
Yes.
It says they must not only replace clerical authority with the authority of the academic community, but they must remove the hierarchy of knowledge. And for our friends listening, that it's clear that when God speaks, that's certain. You can't get any more certain than God telling you something, It's on the other hand, men think about what God has to say, and they might use philosophy, and philosophy can tell us about things that don't depend on the changes of scientific experiments, which already tells you at the bottom of the list, not because we don't like it, but because it's the case that science discovers things that are changeable. And we already see scientists moving from one paradigm to another to explain physics or whatever, and we hope that they continue to make progress in medicine and stuff, but they do change. And so automatically you see that God speaking, which is Christian revelation, and then philosophy, these two are higher than the temporary things or the changeable things that science discovers. But they say in here, To perform its teaching and research functions effectively, the Catholic University, let me jump down to the hierarchy of knowledge. This is section 4, paragraph 3. It says there must be no theological or philosophical imperialism. All scientific and disciplinary methods and methodologies must be given due honor and respect. Well, that's already happening in Catholic universities. They're doing research, they're inventing things, people are getting Nobel Prizes. It's not that there was any constriction on doing science. There is always the ethical constraints on doing science, and that's whether you have a theology in your university or not. Right?
And you do see this because it seems like when scientists are left to themselves, their own scientific statements of their ethical limitations will be different than the churches, for example.
Yeah, yes. We don't want you experimenting on people no matter how much they volunteer because you're going to give them $1 million or something. There are limits. But here they want to remove the hierarchy of revelation from God and what men think about things that don't change. They want to remove that and say that theology and philosophy can be imperial, by which think of the British Empire and India. The idea is that India should be free. Great Britain shouldn't have anything to say about what India does, because that would be imperialism. But clearly it has to have something to say. It
does. We'll hold that thought because we'll pick it up again after a short break, and when we come back, we'll look some more at this question of the hierarchy of knowledge and how theology somehow morphed into religious studies in almost all of the major Catholic institutions. And finally, also look at what the Church has to say about the Catholic identity of these Catholic institutions.
Most men will do almost anything to avoid deep theological discussions. Well, you don't need a doctorate in theology to listen to and enjoy the Catholic Cafe. Join me, Deacon Jeff Drzymski, along with my trusty sidekick Tom Dorian, as we try and make manly sense out of living the Catholic faith.
The Catholic Cafe, Saturdays at 4 p.m. Eastern and Sundays at 5 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio. Live truth, live Catholic.
Stay up to date on the latest EWTN TV and radio shows, books, art, CDs, and DVDs from Religious Catalog when you sign up for Wings, our weekly e-newsletter. Get Wings today at EWTN.com.
And I'm Doug Keck here on EWTN's Bookmark Brief. I just finished talking with my great friend Marcus Grodi about his new book, Life from Our Land, The Search for a Simpler Life in a Complex World. And Marcus, could you give us a synopsis of what this book is about?
Wow, maybe the subtitle really puts it. How do we understand Christ's radical call to simplicity? Often statements about denying wealth and possessions. How do we live that out? Does it necessarily mean leaving the city and going to the country and getting a farm? No, not necessarily, because you might find that's not a simple life at all. But the book's about is what Marilyn and I did learn, and my children, from our time in the rural life about living a more detached, simple life in obedience to Christ, and then trying to figure out how we can pass it on to our kids.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Marcus. Look for Marcus Grodi's interview about his book, Life from Our Land, The Search for a Simpler Life in a Complex World. It's available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Thank you for joining us on this EWTN Bookmark Brief.
This is Bishop Paul Bradley of the Diocese of Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Hi, this is Tim Staples from Catholic Answers Live.
This is Father John Ricardo. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
Well, we're back, and we were talking about the proposed idea of a Catholic university, and we left off with how theology departments sort of morphed into religious studies, not universally, but in many places after this time.
As you said, persons can look in the third section, first paragraph, where they talk about how theology gets morphed into religious studies. But it should be said in summary that these changes do not result in a Catholic university at the service of the society and God, because it redirects the faculty and the students to rather a playing field in which there is nothing, no certainty greater than another, that God's revelation to us isn't as certain as it should be and have a place in our life. One goes to Catholic university for those distinctives. You don't expect Indiana University to have that.
That's right, yeah. and it's not as if it's not a legitimate thing in a Catholic college or university to study other religions, to do religious studies in a generic way, as the authors of the statement put forward, to understand other cultures, to understand other peoples and religions, to know how the sources of revelation are distinctive, claimed revelation are distinctive in different non-Catholic traditions and so on. All of that is legitimate, but it's the uniqueness of theology, I think. And this is where the church, talking not just about the role of theology and its placement in Catholic education, but its this hierarchy of values and of importance, that the knowledge of God is the most important feature that the church has indeed insisted upon before Land O'Lakes, since Land O'Lakes, and going into the future, no doubt will as well.
That's right, Colin. The church has consistently taught about the proper relationship of the disciplines within the church, within Catholic education, and the true idea of the Catholic university. It has never stopped doing so. It's been doing this throughout the centuries. And to reinforce this teaching, Pope John Paul II issued an apostolic constitution. It's called Ex Corde Ecclesiae in 1990.
That is a third rail of Catholic education, because you say those words, it's like saying, Holy Office, Inquisition, or something like that. People sometimes react to it that way in education.
Right, but when we talk about an apostolic constitution, this is the highest category of teaching or canonical document. So what does Pope John Paul II say on the topic of the Catholic identity of the Catholic University? Well, if we look at number 27 of Ex Corde Ecclesiae, the Pope teaches every Catholic university, without ceasing to be a university, has a relationship to the Church that is essential to its institutional identity. So that is what distinguishes a Catholic university from Indiana University, for example. The relationship to the church. And so this means that a Catholic university participates most directly in the life of the local church in which it is situated. And it is an academic institution, and therefore a part of the international community of scholarship and inquiry. Therefore, each institution participates in and contributes to the life and the mission of the universal church, assuming consequently a special bond with the Holy See by reason of the service to unity which it is called to render to the whole church.
So the presumption is that faith is ultimately guiding of the church's life, guiding of the discipline of theology, and therefore guiding of the other disciplines in ways that are meant to be constructive, not destructive or inhibiting.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so what is the Pope expands more on what he means by essential relationship with the church. So this essential relationship between a Catholic university and the church must be an institutional fidelity of the university to the Christian message, which includes a recognition and an adherence to the teaching authority of the church in matters of faith and morals. So here you have the magisterium. It's a recognition of and adherence to the teaching authority of the church in matters of faith and morals. And what else happens? What else is an essential element? Well, a personal fidelity to the church by Catholic members of the university community, There's also a respect for the Catholic character of the university by non-Catholic members. And finally, there's a respect by the university for the religious liberty of non-Catholic members. So this is really, really key about these 4 attributes. But most essential is acknowledging and recognizing the magisterium, that the magisterium is the authority when we're talking about faith and morals. I, as a theologian, am not the authority. Yeah. I've been given permission by the magisterium to teach, but the magisterium gets its authority from who? Jesus Christ himself. And so I can't usurp that authority. And we've had, I just want to point out that we have some examples of public dissent. Before Excordia Ecclesiae, we were talking about the Land O'Lakes, there was a public contradiction of magisterial teaching on abortion and contraception, where we had ads and public comments made by various authorities in the church, whether it was priests or professors. We have some examples of public dissent after Excordia Ecclesiae. And the 2 that I'd like to mention is when Notre Dame invited former President Barack Obama, who's the country's most pro-abortion president that the U.S. has ever had, to deliver its commencement address in 2009. And not only that, but he also received an honorary degree and the university's prestigious Laetare Medal. And then in 2016, they did it again. Notre Dame, they honored another pro-abortion Catholic politician, former Vice President Joe Biden, by also awarding him the Laetare Medal. And Joe Biden has been very, very public in his dissent by supporting Roe v. Wade, by supporting federal funding for embryonic stem cell research, by supporting same-sex marriage, even presided at a same-sex wedding, and in supporting the abortion contraception mandate imposed on on all Catholic institutions and organizations. So these are some examples of where we've had several instances of public dissent against Excordia Ecclesiae.
Well, I want to talk some more about this relationship of theology, because I think the hierarchy of disciplines and the relative authority, say, of science and philosophy compared with faith and the certain conclusions of theology are very, very important. But if we take our first caller, is Mark in Cincinnati, Ohio. You're on the air, Mark. What's your question today?
Well, it wasn't so much a question as it was a comment. I myself went to a Catholic university and graduated 40 years ago, the University of San Diego, run by the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. My daughter graduated from Xavier here in Cincinnati, and it's run by the Jesuits. And both schools are intellectual and spiritual sewers. I mean, it's an out-of-control situation. First of all, if you went to a shiva for Jews, you wouldn't have non-Jews teaching there, and you wouldn't have non-Muslims teaching at their religious facilities.
Certainly not in the theology or religion department.
That's right.
They wouldn't have them anywhere. They wouldn't even have them on campus. So what you do is you end up with these so-called Catholic universities wanting to be more Christian than Christ, more understanding than Christ, more liberal and giving and loving than Christ. And as a result, they create a climate of intellectual and spiritual chaos on these campuses. And that's why the Newman Society is evaluating these schools, saying, these places are out of control.
Yeah, I think
send your kids to these places.
Yeah, we got about a minute here left. I think you've hit upon what is the experience of parents. I've been here at EWTN for going on 22 years, and I've heard this since I arrived. I taught at Aquinas College in Nashville before that, a great school. I participated in the extra It's been a long day and a long week. Ex Corde Ecclesia discussions as part of the Louisville province on behalf of Aquinas College when those were done. And what I've always heard from parents is precisely this complaint, and that is, despite this alleged allegation of freedom, academic freedom, that has been put forward as an argument in favor of this new approach to the idea of a university, nonetheless, it has had the opposite effect. You know, if you look at the direction that the secular colleges are going, they're basically ideological, and they're not at all centered on academic freedom and free research. So that standard seems to have failed, and the Catholic colleges have followed it down that road to essentially meaninglessness. Well, we're going to take a break here at the bottom of the hour. We'll be back to take more of your questions and talk about Catholic education and the Land of Lakes Statement from 1967. Be back in a few minutes.
Be a part of Mother Angelica's mission. EWTN Radio is seeking a dynamic producer to join our growing radio team. The EWTN radio producer is responsible for managing all aspects of live and recorded programs, develops program ideas consistent with EWTN's mission, and collaborates with the leading voices in Catholic radio. For all the details about this exciting opportunity, click on employment at EWTN.com.
Welcome to EWTN's Catholic Almanac.
Today is August 4th, the memorial of St. John Vianney. Assigned to a poorly attended parish, he quickly became known for his preaching and confessional skills. Thousands returned to the faith because of him. He died in 1859. Also, Pope St. Pius X was elected Pope on this day in 1903. Pope St. Pius believed in frequent reception of Holy Communion. He permitted children to receive First Holy Communion at the age of reason instead of waiting until they were older.
Celebrating 100 years of Fatima with Monsignor Charles Pope.
On October 13, 1917, Our Lady spoke to the children at Fatima, and she said, people must amend their lives and ask forgiveness for their sins if they want healings or conversion. And she says, do not offend the Lord our God anymore, because he is already so much offended. Very often we want God to grant us many things, but the thing that God is most waiting for us to ask for is our own conversion. How pleased God is by this, and he will grant us every other thing besides if he can obtain our ongoing conversion. So Our Lady reminds us, pray, ask God for things, but always ask for the most important thing, our own conversion, and the conversion of people we know and love, indeed the whole world. This sort of prayer pleases the Lord.
Join EWTN as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Fatima. Visit EWTN.com/Fatima.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
Well, we're back, and we heard Tom Price giving us those phone numbers again, so get your calls in. We have open lines, and even though this is not Open Line Friday, we have open lines. So call in and ask your questions about Catholic education in Land of Lakes. Let's start off this half hour on the point about the hierarchy of disciplines. So central to the argument of Land of Lakes is this idea that, according to the traditional way of understanding it within the church and among Catholic universities, you know, going back to Bologna and Cambridge and Oxford and Paris in the 1200s, so this is not like yesterday.
Yeah.
Going back to those ideas, that with theology we have certain knowledge because God, or with faith we have certain knowledge because God has revealed it. The magisterium determines what God has revealed. Theology ponders it and draws other conclusions of it. Anselm's great faith-seeking understanding. And that philosophy, of course, is the foundation of mathematics and the other sciences, and therefore it's in a position to judge whether the principles its philosophical principles guiding it, the principle of unity or of identity or the contradiction or whatever, if any of these logical fallacies are invoked in order to see whether the scientific method is accurately being utilized in the service of the truth. So we always had this hierarchy. The supernatural truths and those derived from them through theology, the philosophical truths which represent a perennial understanding of the nature of being and causation and logic and so on, and then the descriptive sciences, the natural sciences and the human sciences, as being governed by true principles and not simply by mere opinion, and not certainly entirely by simply facts. So there was this order in which you could make a judgment as to whether something was being violated. So an example would be on the subject of evolution. Is man merely a materialistic being? Well, even philosophy says no, man is both body and spirit. And theology certainly says it, and the faith absolutely teaches it. So you would think that somebody proceeding scientifically to argue a purely materialistic conception is pushing their own philosophical worldview and ordering the facts and theories according to that worldview. And so that this has obviously a great danger to it. So, but it was this that wanted to be set aside so that there could be no arbitration of the value of merely human knowledge by any authority other than the professors and scientists themselves. The fruit of that we saw the other day in the announcement that they are now tampering with the genetics of embryos in order to, a good purpose, prevent disease, but a purpose that will lead to the destruction of individuals of the human species in the pursuit of it. So this is a very important, it's at the heart of our culture, and it's at the heart, I think, of the destruction of Catholic education, or the diminishment of Catholic education in the United States.
One can understand that parents sending their kids to a Catholic school would like to have the kids educated in what in the human disciplines as God thinks about them. And so you have certainty, as again, one of the ways to distinguish this, which doesn't require any kind of sleight of hand on the part of the person, the question of certainty. Experiments only give you a partial knowledge of things, as is evident to us from all the science we see around us. 10 years ago, what causes cancer? This year, what causes cancer? There are different things. But on the other hand, you don't do experiments to discover what justice is. You have to think about that philosophically. And just because you think about it philosophically doesn't mean the conclusions are less certain. I imagine many people out there have a clear understanding of what justice would be in its essential points, and they could think about it without having to do experiments, because you don't do experiments to find out what justice is. You may do an experiment to find out how much money they stole or how much gold is inside, some statue that they've taken away. But on the other hand, when God has spoken, and we Christians understand that God speaks through the church, we have the scriptures as an example of something produced for us by the church. And when God says, man is made in the image of God, you want an educational system that shows you what the effect of that is all across the faculties of learning. Because no human learning takes place without both faith and reason, with trust and reason. You have to trust your professor. You have to reason, is the professor reliable or not? Do they really have their credentials?
Well, a natural faith. You have to have a natural faith in the historian reporting about what happened in the past, in the colleague writing in a scientific journal.
Yes.
And sometimes that's been discovered to be erroneous or false or even fraudulent. You put your faith in somebody, even for human things, and certainly when it comes to religious things, faith in God.
That's right. Without God, who's the source of all knowledge, doesn't matter which discipline of knowledge I'm in, it should lead to Him. Yeah. And when you separate that, then you have chaos, because you don't know whether something is actually true or not, and you begin to trample on the dignity of the human person, created in the image and likeness of God.
And that gives you a true finality if your mind is fixed on God And there's certainly a rejection of, say, the scholastic idea of a university, or even Newman's idea of a university for that matter, in all of this. Because ultimately it's an unwillingness to subject oneself to anything other than opinions which I find acceptable. So if you're relying on, well, if the faculty in my department says it's okay, it's legitimate, or my conclusions, or my colleagues are, that gives me a certain finality. And you're not asking yourself, especially if it touches on some ethical area, what about the morality of this? That's not my discipline. I am a biologist.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out I'm also a moral theologian, but
Yeah.
Let's say a typical biologist or medical technician, well, within my field, this is practical. I can do it. I can accomplish it. I can change the gene in this embryo. I can put it back in its mother, or I can create them and put them in surrogates and whatever. I can do it. It's possible. It's plausible. It's for a good purpose. Therefore, I ought to do it. And the question is never asked, what is the finality of human life? That's a philosophical question. Ultimately, it's a theological question. And that finality of God is always being left out of the equation.
Yes.
Let's talk for a moment. Oh, here we have, for a moment anyway, about inductive theology. This is something in the 20th century that rose gradually, post Pope Leo XIII and his desire to renovate Catholic philosophy, specifically Thomism, with in legitimate ways. And we see certainly a development of an idealistic Thomism, transcendental Thomism of Karl Rahner and Bernard Lonergan, and others who are exponents of this view that experience actually is, in some sense, would have to be considered revelatory. And it's led to the atomization of theology into you're only an expert in this one little tiny area. That's one effect of it. But also we now have women's theology and Latina theology. I guess you could do both. You could do both women's and Latina theology. I don't know if they have an Irish theology. That might be something to do. They have Celtic spirituality.
Feminist theology.
Feminist theology. And that all of these are almost a source of divine revelation. I don't think they claim that, but they see a pastoral good and purpose in it. But it's this chunk, everything is being atomized in theology. And now we have it on our campuses where there is no general knowledge, there is no universal knowledge. It's if you are not that kind of person, you can't speak to me about what that kind of person is.
Yeah.
Because you can't make you're not a woman, you can't make a claim about anything dealing with women. Or you're not a Latina, you can't make a claim about anything dealing with, or Latino and Latinos, Hispanics. So you have this idea that there's only almost a private theology which is driving it.
That's right.
It's so sad for our students who go to a Catholic school who would like to have an institution that gives them the point of view from a certainty, not a certainty that nothing is greater than anything else, but a certainty that, yes, God has spoken in Christ, and because God has spoken in Christ, this is how things fall out. Now, you're free to go to any university you want. You can go to a Mormon university, you can go to a secular university, but when you come to a Catholic one, they should be able to give you what the church presents from the view, starting with the certainty that Jesus Christ is God. And that should not be something that is compromised. People, if you educate people and teach them the sciences, because sciences will not be harmed by beginning with the certainty that Jesus Christ is God. It will not be harmed. It will flourish. And the human person will flourish and not be made a victim of sciences experimenting on them improperly.
Yeah, it has no impact on genetics or chromosomes whether or not Jesus is Lord, but it has the impact on the scientist to know that,
yes,
and his own integration of everything that he knows, not only from his scientific work, but from his own personal experience and life. Cindy, here I'm going to throw you this question from Arthur on Facebook. Is it a prerequisite that a student at a Catholic university be a Catholic? And I'll throw out also, is it a good thing that there are non-Catholics at university as there are?
It absolutely is a good thing. And no, it's not a prerequisite that a student be a Catholic. at a Catholic university. However, what you're going to find at a Catholic university is you're going to have the academia, but you're also going to have the faith, seeking understanding, the presentation of Jesus, because that's who we are as Catholics. Jesus is Lord and Savior of the world, and this message has gone universally, and this church is connected. There's a relationship between every Catholic, or should be, between every Catholic university and college, relationship with what St. John Paul II said with the church. It's united with the church in presenting the gospel message.
And I would note that in many places in the world, even in Muslim countries, in Bangladesh and other places, very often the largest percentage of people in Catholic educational institutions are not Catholic, because there are very few Catholics in many of those countries. And many times people, for instance, I have a friend whose father was an atheist, but he didn't want his kids to grow up without some kind of morality, so he sent them to a Catholic school. This is a very common experience because people realize that maybe it's naive on their part to think, well, they can get a good moral education and not be somehow persuaded about Christ, or at least be able to make up their own mind. I don't know. But there's a generosity both on the church's part in receiving such students, and on the part of parents in sending their non-Catholic children to Catholic schools, recognizing the benefits of that education.
People should be made clear. A good Catholic university has rigor in its religion, in its philosophy, and in its sciences, so that you can come out of there better able to understand nature, what God is doing in the world and not doing. You can understand how to be an honest scientist and how to look at information in the world, how to look at nature. So, and honesty, people can look up on the internet and see the trouble that the scientists have had from time to time in the last 20 years with scientists cooking the data.
Right.
Just because, they are driven by the fact they want their money for their project or any number of other things. But moral teaching helps you to be a scientist who is willing to follow the data where it leads and report it factually to other people without cooking it.
No, that's
Right.
true. We have a question here on YouTube. This seems to be the day for the social media, not the traditional telephone system. On YouTube, George in Sydney, Australia perhaps, was the introduction to universities the byproduct of the Catholic Church? And if so, in what century did this start?
Now I'll let you go. I know you want it.
I want to make a distinction here. You use the word university, not the word college. That is quite important, because a college is a particular faculty, like biology or law or something. A university is where you understand how these things all work together to tell you the truth. But how philosophy, theology, and science work together, as I use the term, play a symphony. And so the Catholic Church, in Greece, you didn't have a symphony. In Israel, you didn't have a symphony because they had no sciences. But when the church met Greece and Greece met the church, as St. Paul went over to help that gentleman, eventually you had where Jesus Christ was able to show the unity of these things in a symphony of truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it's certainly true that when universities began in the West, there were probably some semblances of it in the Islamic world in the Middle Ages as well, in Egypt and other places. And so there were the great writers in philosophy like Averroes and Avicenna, people like that. But it was really with the discovery of Aristotle's writings in a clearer form. There were corrupted versions of it. And so in the late Middle Ages with Albert the Great and Thomas Aquinas and the Scholastics, there began a refinement of philosophical method and the founding of universities, primarily philosophy, theology, and canon law. So these were church-related purposes in places like Bologna and Braga in Portugal, or Coimbra in Portugal, rather, and Oxford in England, and in Paris, the University of Paris, which we generally speak of the Sorbonne today because it's entirely secularized. So these great institutions were philosophical, they were canonical, and they were theological. But what did that produce? Out of the philosophy faculties has come the scientific method, founded on Aristotle's inductive method for philosophy, but also upon his own scientific ideas, that has developed over time into the very method which today is often used against the church. But yet it's really within the church that the Greek ideas found their revival and renewal in the West. And from that has come forth most of what we would call at least Western civilization and Western ideas and progress, some of which is not progress at all, but we understand materially we have progressed a great deal. Even though it's gone down rabbit holes in different places with materialism and idealism and so on, and through the Industrial Revolution and all of that, nonetheless, it came out of the church. And from that derives most of, for instance, in every graduation, when you put on the funny caps and the funny gowns, that's coming out of the Catholic Church, out of the Catholic institutions. The titling and all of that, the license which I have from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas is essentially the forerunner of the master's degree, because it shows a mastery of the subject matter that one is capable of teaching. So the minimal requirement for teaching is a license to teach, or the master, that you have mastered the subject, comes right out of what led Aquinas to write the Summa, is basically his master's thesis. Or a representation of the summation of all knowledge that you had to have in order to be a master of your discipline. So the church has given the West so much, and yet the church is getting blamed for not bringing rigor to science and not bringing rigor to theology. And the alternative is we're accused of being rationalistic in some parts of even the Christian world. But the point is, there's always a true way to integrate these things. And sometimes, I think today in our Catholic faculties and non-religious departments as well, that's not being done. The greater truths are being forgotten. And it's an entirely materialistic worldview that is pragmatic and not very representative of the true Catholic idea of a university.
Yes. I was rereading for probably the fifth time The Magician's Nephew, the Chronicles of Narnia, and in there you see the creation of Narnia by Aslan, and the soil is very fertile because it's bringing up the trees that Aslan wants to create the forest with, and this guy from England, who's an old guy there who represents the secular point of view and an entrepreneur point of view, sees that and says, oh my gosh, we need to get this back to England. We can make a lot of money. If we could just get this back to England and we can put stuff in it and it'll grow real fast and all this. Well, my point about all that is, starting with Jesus Christ as God, one would be able to teach such a person minded that way, that maybe the proper response to something wonderful is not to think, how can I make money from it, but to say thank you.
That's right.
Well, that sparks an idea. The church traces through the apostles back to Jesus. So the university, as the world understands it today, is the fruit of the encounter between the apostles and Jesus, which means that Jesus, and through the church, is the custodian of a true relationship of human wisdom with divine wisdom passed down to our day. So where did Land O'Lakes go to for its view of education?
Secular.
They went outside of that to the secular world to look to how the relationship works in the secular world. And so that today, I said ex cordia ecclesia half jokingly, brought up something at the time in the 1990s of, well, the Inquisition and the bishop and the authority and all of that being locked down. Where do you find that today? In the secular universities, where you're not free to say things, where it isn't the bishop in your local diocese or the bishop in Rome telling you, you're being naughty, change the way you teach, or this on this point you're being materialistic and not a good theologian or a good whatever. No. It's the faculty and the students raising and shouting you down because you don't hold the orthodox ideology of the day on that particular campus. And so the fruit of all of this approach has been, whether in the secular world or in the Catholic, a view which atomizes knowledge so that transcendent ideas about the Trinity are in one department the subject matter, and in another the vagina monologues or something of that nature is a fit object of inquisition and study for the students and others. This is the spectrum of dichotomy that exists now on campuses, where everything is ideological and not at all integrated. It's produced exactly the opposite fruit. And it would be wonderful if these facts, which are so evident to those with an eye to look, would be recognized by our Catholic colleges, as they have been in many who have returned to the truth, and it become the modus operandi of these universities to recover that which the Church always had, with human fault and excess at one time or laxity at another, but recover what the Church possesses because it has an encounter with Jesus Christ guiding it, and not the secular values of the world or the money of the government or whatever it is.
People should go back and read the material. The Pope often in the early universities, 13th, 14th centuries, there were various powers trying to gain control of the universities, and the popes often wrote letters telling those authorities, look, keep your hands off the university, let them do their work, let them do what they do. And sometimes it was at cost. It wasn't always a free ride for the Pope to come in and tell the university they have their freedom. It's not the Pope that is the enemy of education. It is not starting with Jesus Christ as God, because when you start that way, my gosh, the whole universe is a wonderful place where you know that no matter how difficult it seems or how unusual it is, that it comes from Christ, and you can find a way to give thanks to Him with it and to do good with other people using it.
And you get an integral vision of truth, an integral vision of man, an integral vision of creation, and not some other. Cindy, I know you and I have had some encounters, professional, with higher education. What are your particular insights that you think our audience needs to know?
Well, stressing that this is not something new, that we're talking about. That we've had even Pope Francis, just in 2014. When the Board of Notre Dame was there, as well as other officials from Notre Dame were there. They were in Rome for the inauguration of the university's new Rome Center. He stressed this to them. He said that Catholic universities must give uncompromising and unambiguous witness to church teaching and defend themselves from all efforts to dilute their Catholic identity. And I just hope and pray that those who may be listening would take that to heart and stand up and defend your Catholic identity. Don't dilute it. Don't water it down.
And you can have all of that with academic freedom within the due bounds of the disciplines and the method of the discipline, without any violence to good research and the rest. And I think that's important for people to know. Well, it's been a wide-ranging show, and I hope we've thrown some light on the issue. It's certainly a tough nut, and we don't intend to decry any particular institution or any particular faculty, but only to point out that which the Church has always taught about the idea of a university, so that they can become better what they are meant to be. Until next time, God bless.